Today is August 19th, and welcome to the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. Tonight is going to be actually a fun night. We are going to have a discussion with Josh Duffney, who is a SRE for Stack Overflow, but not just for that. We want to actually have just a simple conversation and talk about, what your life is like, career development, personal development. We're in this world right now of everybody's going in different directions, and we want to support you as the individual, and want to get some insights from Josh, who's had some experience, but we also want to hear from the community at large. And so we're super excited to actually have just a short little discussion, and hopefully you can join us for this. So thanks so much. So Josh, tell me about yourself.
Well, name's Josh Duffney. I'm a site reliability engineer at Stack Overflow. I've been a member of the PowerShell community for probably 7 or 8 years. I like to refer to it as like I grew up in the PowerShell community, and I owe my career to the PowerShell community. Before I really discovered PowerShell, I had a job, and it was a good job. I worked in technology. I enjoyed it, but PowerShell is what really got me passionate about technology and gave me a career. Aside from that, I do some side things. I've done some Pluralsight courses. I do a blog. I have a book, my first self-published book that'll be coming out next month. So yeah, just try to dabble in a lot of things.
So you kind of talked about what your career looks like. You said you grew up in PowerShell. Where did you really start? Where did how did you start off?
So the very beginning, it was join the military or get 2 free years of school. And there's nothing against the military. I just chose to go the college route. So I went there and I got 2 years and graduated with my associates in computer applied science, but it was for computer networking. From there, I landed in the help desk. So a very similar story to a lot of people that have landed in the sysadmin role, where they kind of started in the help desk, and that's where I started as well. I worked in that for a couple of years, then moved on to basically a one-man shop, a jack of all trades, where I ran basically the IT department for a small bank. I really enjoyed that job because I got to learn everything. I racked servers, put memory in there. I got to redesign the data center, which was a closet, and re-racked all the cables and made them color-coded and all that good stuff. And then I eventually landed on the service desk for a large enterprise. And I had, for the first time, to deal with bulk requests. So instead of this one person leaving and clicking disable, right-clicking disable, and a GUI, I had 300 that I needed to disable. And that's where I started to find PowerShell. And so that's where I transitioned more from the help desk into an engineering role, mainly focused on PowerShell, progressed a little bit further to a senior systems engineer, did a lot of Active Directory, backed with SQL and stuff like that. And then eventually I transitioned into a DevOps role after I found, really after DSC. I found that and started diving into that, got really interested in the DevOps movement and trying to progress my PowerShell skills. And what I found is the further I went along with my PowerShell skills, the closer and closer I went to quote unquote traditional development practices using source control, release pipelines. And then I found myself in a DevOps role, that's where I've been for the last about 4 years. So that's kind of the long tail of it, I suppose.
No, that's great.
Super interesting. So I remember running into you early, like being a guy that was doing stuff online and trying to figure out how to do stuff and how to find solutions. And I started like coming across solutions from like Spiceworks and like that small community stuff, right? Yeah. And then moving on to bigger stuff. Like, how did you get started with like the Spiceworks thing? Was that something that you wanted to do to like, I have no software in the company and I needed to do something, or did you just use it for like the community part?
It started, so my very first job on the help desk that I got out of college, my first task was to implement a help desk system. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a budget, right? So, mm-hmm. And I just started right out of college. I was going to go to the CTO and be like, give me money for this help desk tool. I wasn't comfortable with that yet. So I found Spiceworks. And so it started as it solved my problem with the ticketing system. Then I found the community, which really, the community has been the linchpin of all the progress that I've made. The community in every aspect and regard is how you can stand on the shoulder of giants. And I found that out rather quickly in the Spiceworks, where I was just out of college. Like I knew what things were and I knew how to say what I wanted to do, but I didn't know what to do. And so I would post questions on there. And then I eventually, took enough from the community that I felt obligated to get back, and I started writing how-tos. And I learned the value in written content and sharing, both because it helps someone else, but then it also furthers my understanding. And so from there on, like, I was hooked. And that's how I really progressed through my career, is just constant engagement, because I could accelerate my learning so much quicker by having access to a group of brilliant minds all over the world, and also furthering my understanding by creating helpful guides.
I know that there's a lot of people that think that like Spiceworks, the software, is like, oh man, I can't believe you're using that kind of stuff. But that community that's going on there is really interesting, because there's a lot of guys that run small and medium shops that have to figure out creative ways to solve problems, mostly because, you get to these larger shops, you either have teams or budgets or both. When you're a small shop, like you said, and you're one guy doing it, or you're a small team and you have to figure out solutions, you really have to become like a jack of all trades and figure out stuff. So even though I never really used Spiceworks software, I did use it for a little bit. I always found that community interesting, because there's a bunch of guys there and girls that really just they just seem to help themselves out, figure out, and much like the bigger PowerShell community, I don't see a lot of animosity there. It's a really good place for people to understand how to do things and ask questions without being intimidated or getting a lot of frustration. Is that the sort of experience you got when you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was in that community, and I was a Spice leader for Omaha for a while, for quite a few
Yeah,
years. I
that's
think I
so
still
cool.
have the rights if I were to log in. I haven't been an active member for a few years now.
Yeah. So, how did you get your start when you felt like, what was sort of the bug that got you to like, I feel like I could write something that could be useful for people?
Well, it was after I asked probably like 20 questions on Linux, because I wanted. So my next problem after I got the help desk tool or project was to uh, image Windows 7, like the whole, basically move everybody from XP to Windows 7. And after about 10 installs with the disk, I got really annoyed, and I started to search for answers. And so a couple of people on that question said, "Why don't you look in the Fog project?" And so I did. And that's a open source imaging platform
Mm-hmm.
that you can use, or tool. But I didn't. I mean, I had a Linux class in college, so I knew how to like install Ubuntu. But beyond that, I really didn't know. And so I asked much more questions. And then eventually, it took me, I don't know, a couple days, maybe a week, and I got it working to image my specific thing. I had the drivers loaded in there. And so I wrote this really detailed article, really to remind myself like how to do this, because for whatever reason, the computer I chose to put it on, the hard drive died, and I had to do it again. And so I decided, like, if it happens again, I want to have some way to repeat this. And so I wrote that article. I went on there like a year ago, and there were still comments. I think I wrote that in 2011, 2012, and there were still comments on that article, which was very amusing to me. But really, it was to help myself more than anything. But
Well, that's the most valuable part of thinking, some of the things that I've written and actually, like, oh, I got to use it for my own code. Like, I know there's something I wrote something, go find that content. So I think it's a very valuable asset. So people who don't really, like to write that down, simply write it down for some purpose. And so you can find value, especially if you blog yourself. But, is that how you kind of got into, blogging and writing articles?
yeah, it was.
Just
So
document yourself.
I kind of went down a similar path, in the sense that I was an avid sort of like note taker. I'm a big user of Evernote. Never really caught the OneNote bug, but this whole idea of capturing articles for use later on and writing notes to myself so I can remember how to do something. Um, I never was able to sort of actively manage notebooks and paper, so I always forced myself to get it written down on the computer somewhere. And then one day I had this light bulb moment, like, why don't I just take those notes and put them online? Like, someone could probably use those same notes. And I really just started as saying, like, let me write notes to myself. And then I was like, you're an idiot. Why are you not sharing this with somebody? So I just decided to sort of like post them. And I think the hardest part that people have is they kind of evaluate themselves like, oh, that's not worthwhile sharing. But I think that's a mistake. I think most people should just share things more and not worry about the quality per se, and just put it out there. And you get better as you do things. But my path to like blogging was similar to yours. Like, I just started partially because I felt like I owed it to the community to give back after being like a master Googler, but also thinking that I got a repository of notes that someone might actually find useful. Let me start putting them out there.
Well, let me ask you, Josh, about, even to that point, is that one of the things Mike said is that, hey, I don't want to put it online to be like, it's good enough quality. So what is your take on some of the, even the stuff that you've written or even contributed to the idea that, hey, it's not really good enough for to post with other people, but it's good enough to be my personal notes. But like, I personally think, hey, it is what it is, and you can change what it is. So
Yeah, I got asked, well, not directly, but there was a question that I saw that I replied to that was basically, I've only been in IT a year or two. How do you know when you're basically good enough to write content or to publish content or to write anything? And my reply was, you're good enough now. There's no reason to wait. There are only excuses. And the reason is because technology is the great equalizer. There's things that 1 year into your career that people that have 20 years don't know because there's just so much to know. And in the very beginning, quantity is more important than quality because you have to build the evidence for that new identity of someone that writes content. And that's really the key, is to get you writing consistently so that way that you don't know yet what you need to improve until you start doing it. And so that's why in the beginning you want to focus on the quantity and not the quality.
you're saying like quantity and just like, get stuff out there, either share it with yourself, share it with the community, and the idea that, you don't have to, write this great prose that, is a dialogue. It's a storyline, and this doesn't flow from here to here. Because that's my struggle. It's like, I don't want to write because I want to, like, I can just throw out some notes, but then I'm looking at it and I see my own content. But then I'm going, well, if I need to share this with somebody else, I need to, put notes and tell everybody where it is. But then that's really been my struggle personally. And what do you think about that?
It depends on your intent, right? So if like you want to write a really good article and your intent is to teach someone something, I think that will naturally evolve over time. Like if you look at, I think I removed it now, but my first article was basically just like a script that says what it does, and that was it. But that got me starting. So it really depends on your intent. I mean, if you're just starting, I wouldn't put your mastery shouldn't be your aim in the beginning. It should be competency. And so like writing is a skill, just like PowerShell is a skill or anything else, and it just takes repetition. So I wouldn't let that stop you.
And I think blogging is an extension of the whole documentation part of our job, or most people's jobs. Documentation is probably the part that comes hardest for a lot of people. Maybe that, and maybe learning or starting with a new area. And people probably put off the documentation part because it's like, oh, it's a challenge to write, or I don't feel that I write good enough directions to walk someone else through it. So to Josh's point, with technical people, and our forte isn't always about telling a story or writing a story, but it's a skill that gets better over time the more you do it. So you can always take down your old content if you really don't like it, but it's very hard to get any practice in if you don't actually go through the process of writing and reviewing something and reading it and having other people having the opportunity to comment on it and give honestly feedback and say, I see what you were going for here, or I kind of didn't get the point of what you were saying here. It becomes a muscle that gets stronger over time as you do it. So Josh's 100% right here. If you're interested in sharing knowledge with others, you just have to sort of do it and not be so concerned about the thought of what people are going to think of the work that you're doing, and just know that it has value.
Well, is it also one of those things where, hey, well, other people are writing about it, so there's no reason for me to write about it? Is that like also kind of what you said at that point? Is that, you don't really, you know, oh, I don't know, it's like imposter syndrome. He's already talked about it, so I don't need to talk about it. But I think we should.
We all fall into that. I mean, I fall into that. Like, oh, they've already talked about this with Azure, or they've talked about this with Ansible. An Ansible book already exists. Why should I write one? That was a thought that I had before I started writing mine. And the truth is, I mean, Don Jones says this quite a bit in his work as well, is it doesn't exist from your perspective. And so it's still worth writing.
Or worth sharing ultimately too.
Right.
And so,
Yep.
if your avenue of sharing content with the community at large is through full blogs, then it's fine. Or if it's just, tweets, or if it's just being, a lurker inside a forum and you just tear up that forum, you are like in the be all moderator, kind of like you said, is you became the, what did you call it? The
Spice
Iowa
leader. Yeah.
spice leader. You're the spice leader. So, but to that point, you could be that. And so that's really, part of that is just give back to the community and just be what you can be and not be anything more than that.
So another way to look at this is for people who may have thought about the idea of blogging or sharing and maybe not feeling comfortable doing it, or what we just talked about, why should I do this if there's 5 other articles on a topic? It's no different than I think like reading books and finding a favorite author. Sure, they have stories they tell, but most of the times the reason people find an author that they like is they relate to the style of writing that the person is doing. Not so much the quality of the stories per se, but more so the person writes in a style that I can relate to, or tells a story that makes it captivating for me. And that's the whole point. Josh writes in a different style than I may write. We could talk about the same topic, but from 2 different viewpoints can come out with 2 vastly different takes on the same topic. And technology changes rapidly enough that you need people to write about topics over and over again because things change. So I see a good discussion
Mike,
going on in the chat here. I was just going to say, is there anybody who wanted to chime in? So go ahead, Rob.
something that Don always brings up, there's a birth rate, right? We're all getting older and there's new people coming into the field and all that kind of stuff. What you learned 20 years ago, someone coming into the field knows nothing about, or maybe knows a little bit about it and doesn't know the same in depth that you do. So there's going to be someone in areas that you are experienced in that knows nothing about that experience. So write about it.
That's totally true. Go ahead, Phil. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say even the idea that, it's also okay to feel ways to reach out and go beyond your comfort zone, is to, hey, I'm just learning about, this Ansible. I'm just learning about Ansible, and I'm letting get some bits and pieces from here and there, because I think that's something I could use, and they think that's something that I can really get some value out of, but I don't know enough about. But I just got this little, nugget that I just found that I think it's valuable. Then can continue to go on from there. And so, like, as you learn about other things, you could also absorb that content and then share it back out. So, I think what I'm trying to say is, like, you can explore sharing, but by actually, reaching out and getting that content too.
So Josh, would you say that from a technology perspective, the things that you've sort of dabbled in and worked on, do you find that learning new technology comes easy for you?
It depends on how far out of my comfort zone it is.
Okay, because I was going to ask, when people hear someone like yourself talk and they hear about a progression, we give summaries of our career and we talk about things, and probably most people talk about highlights, but I'd be curious to know if there's areas that you struggled at, or there's always things in your career you just wished you could go back and concentrate on more, you were never able to make a dent in this area, or is there things that you struggle at, basically showing the real side of Josh, not just everything is easy for me, I did it all and it was, I snapped my fingers and I'm awesome, right? I mean, there has to be some things that gave you fits and struggles and things you've been trying to improve on over time. What are those? What does that look like for you?
Sure, I've been giving this a decent amount of thought. So in last October, I wrote an article, Be an Engineer, You're an Engineer. And it was really my transparent writing about a year of complacency that I was not investing in my career and not really going anywhere. And it was the most unhappy I've been in my career. And I started to reflect on why that was. And so the way that I've come to describe it is, like, the first decade of my career was really fueled by passion, motivation, and inspiration. And really all I had these high aims that I wanted to hit when I was 20. Like, I want to have X income, I want to have this type of a job. And the whole time I was running off of the passion, motivation, and inspiration. And if you think of it, the way that I've tried to articulate it is, if you think about it like a rocket taking off from Earth, all those 3 things that I mentioned are like the stage 1 rockets. So they got me to exactly where I wanted to be. And all I aimed for was basically the atmosphere. That was everything that I aimed for in my 20s. And I didn't reset my sights. once I hit that. So I eventually hit the atmosphere, and the stage 1 rockets departed, and I didn't have all the things that kept me going forward. And while reflecting on that, I was like, why did I stop blogging? Why did I stop creating Pluralsight courses? Why did my community engagement drop for the year? Why did I just start focusing on work? And the reason is I confused contentment with complacency. So I thought I was being content. I achieved all my goals. I can kind of just, do my job, do these things. Little did I know that the community engagement and the investment in my career is what actually kept the passion going for my career. And so without that change in trajectory, I never really turned on the stage 2 rockets to go with the rocket metaphor. And that's what I've been working on for the last year is how do I recalibrate that? Now it's a little bit different. With the first 10 years of my career, it was just to get out of the atmosphere. It's one direction. It was pretty easy to determine. Now that I'm in space, so to speak, and I have the rest of my career left, I have to decide which planet I want to visit and which direction I want to go. And that's what I've been spending like the last year or so trying to discover. And it's been a difficult question. I've got a really good idea and I've started to pick up some steam as I've gone. A couple lessons that I've learned in that reflection is that your career needs a direction, not an operating manual. And that's where I got hung up for like the first year. It was like, I want to know the next 5 years, like month by month, I'm going to get this certification here, this certification here. I'm going to learn this thing over here. That doesn't work because things are too fluid. And you need to just pick a direction. And this was some advice that Mike Pfeiffer gave is like, you have to learn to become decisive. And so I just said, I want to learn cloud. I want to learn Azure. And then I went and did that. And then I readjusted.
So you think that really helped you is the idea that, you focused on a direction and wherever that direction might take you that's where it took you, not just, those small goals, or is it the small goals within that direction?
It's part of the equation. The direction is one, so that way I can lock on something, accomplish it, and then I'll reassess after that. Otherwise, you'll just sit there and spin your circles of like, is this the best thing to learn? Should I reevaluate in the middle of it? And you'll talk yourself out of making any progress entirely. The other part that I missed in the beginning of my career is that my learning was always outcome driven. I will be happy with myself after I've accomplished something. Now, what's changed in the lesson that I've learned over the last year is it's the enjoyment from learning and how you keep yourself motivated is to learn to love the process of learning versus the outcome of learning. So instead of like right now I'm learning Vi or Vim preference, the process is like to enjoy the actual like art of learning something new and the progress day in, day out, the 1% progress, celebrate that versus once I've mastered Vim or Vi, then I can like check that off my box. So it's more like flag post driven achievement versus like more enjoying the journey, so to speak. Those two coupled together have kept me kind of afloat in more of a trajectory up versus all over the place or downward.
So you think it's best to keep a focus on even like a direction as opposed to, hey, I want to get, 5 certifications. Like they're all over the place and it's not, so that I can get all this other stuff. So like to the point of being like certifications is the key to join to the next level, is the key to the next job and all that kind of stuff. But that shouldn't be the focus. And
right, because if you just aim too short or too long, then it becomes unfulfilling. Because if you aim too short and you're like, I'm just going to pass the certification, why are you passing the certification? Like what does it do after you're done with it? Like what value does it add to your career? But then if you go too long, then everything just changes. Like if you go 5 years out, the technology stack, what you even want to do changes. And so it's really more about aiming for the direction of your career versus like having everything mapped out so perfectly.
So I just wanted to touch on 2 points that you mentioned there. Earlier in the conversation, you read my mind. I was going to mention Mike Pfeiffer, and you beat me to it. Mike Pfeiffer is a guy who's heavily involved right now in cloud. He has a podcast and a website, cloudskills.io. It's a fantastic podcast to listen to. Mike is very inspiring, and he gives a lot of advice about sort of how to carve out your niche in the cloud world. I listen to Mike occasionally, and he's, like I said, he's very inspiring. One of the things I heard him say was that he was trying to focus on being like one step ahead. So he was always stepping back and looking at what is sort of the upcoming thing on the horizon, he would focus his time there so that he sort of was always in demand. He was always learning new technologies, but that's something that he wanted to do. And I bring that up because you mentioned the word fulfillment, and I was going to mention that as well. You know, a lot of this stuff that we do, there's so much technology to learn that um, you really can pick things that interest you. And I think that's important to remember because, look, we can learn things to learn. If there was people talking in the chat about, oh, the pressure to blog and I don't want to blog if I don't have to, that's absolutely right. You need to be involved in activities that do give you some fulfillment and some joy because technology is not the easiest game to stay in, and you're going to have to put a little work in. And if you're not doing things that you get some enjoyment from, it's very hard to stay focused. So it's interesting you said Mike Pfeiffer because I love listening to him and their ideas on fulfillment. I just wanted to highlight those. I also wanted to point out that some of the things Josh was saying, I kind of went through a little bit myself. So my journey into the PowerShell stuff was I was a sysadmin for a long time, but I grew up as a GUI admin, and I just felt the need to sort of learn the command line. And I remember distinctly sitting at a job and saying, I got to learn this. And the next thing that comes into the help desk, I'm going to solve a PowerShell. Now, mind you, I had no idea how to do that. So this ticket came in, I tried to do it, and it was like reset a password or something like that. But I was like an hour and a half into this ticket, and I had no clue what I was doing. And I got super frustrated and mad at myself. And that's when I kind of realized, like, you can't just do something. You have to sort of build an environment for you to learn in and not have this pressure on yourself to learn under like deadlines where it's unrealistic. So, to talk a little bit about the stuff that Josh is saying, when you want to learn something, you have to give yourself the opportunity to learn. You can't just say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to incorporate it in my job tomorrow and it's going to be awesome. And then when it doesn't go awesome and you get frustrated and you throw your cup against the wall and you say, I can't do this, you're not setting yourself up for success when you do that. So it took me figuring out that I had to set aside time every week to learn how to do PowerShell. I couldn't do it until that happened. And I think that goes for any new technology that we want to play with. If you don't set aside some time to do it, it's almost impossible to get started and do something really well when you're expected to do something under duress.
The way that I've framed that is to establish establish a habit of learning, of continuous growth. So once you have that habit of growth established, for me right now, it's to wake up early and to have 1 or 2 hours before my job begins and before my day begins, as a husband or as a parent or as an employee, to dedicate to learning. And then because that habit exists and every day I have 2 hours, I have to fill that time. That is how I keep moving forward and finding new things to learn. But it's the time has to be there first. You're not going to make time. You're not going to find time. I guess you have to make time. You're not going to find it. It's not going to show up. You have to make the time and carve it out for yourself to be able to have that constant growth upward. Otherwise, it'll just be backlogged. If you try to put it at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., something like that, meetings are going to come up. You're going to get derailed. And so it's really, you have to have the discipline to establish the habit of growth for you to have time to learn all these new things. But once you do have that established, then it becomes more fun because you just get to pick what you want to learn in that time then.
Yeah.
So has that been value for you to get up early as opposed to, some people, like my wife's a night owl, but I'm an early bird. Once I get up, I'm up. But, sometimes I'm like, I don't know. So has that been a thing that kind of really sets you off? Has something been valuable to you?
Having the habit there, the morning just works for me, having a full-time job. And then at nighttime, I'm more of a morning person. So it works for me. If you're more of a night owl, I definitely do the night time as well. I mean, I did that to alter a couple courses a few years ago. But yeah, having that time has been the critical point. I mean, that's where over the last 5 months now, I've been writing the book that I've been working on, and that's when I've been doing that. But I've not only just been writing, I've been learning about email marketing. I used Photoshop to create the cover. So I mean, I dabbled in a lot of stuff. But.
So there's a question in the chat from Alvin that's very interesting, kind of timely. I wanted to, you talked about continuous growth and learning. I will say that I'm struggling a little bit right now myself as we transition to working from home full time. I have never been a full-time work from home professional, and now that I am, I find myself like, hey, there's a problem at work I want to solve. And it's not necessarily a problem that I have to solve today, but I'm interested in how to figure out to solve the problem. And I find myself like, oh crap, it's 8:30 and I've been on the computer for 12 hours. The time just goes by. So I am trying to figure out how to separate dedicated time for learning, because right now the day just blends together for me. And it's hard with family life and a job to balance that all. You know, sometimes the kids are like, Dad, when are you getting off the computer? And it's not that I want to be on the computer, it's I didn't realize because I don't have that natural break that I had when it was like, okay, everybody's going home, right? But Alvin asked, do you think it's possible to keep growing if you don't switch jobs, if you don't jump between companies? And I think I have very mixed thoughts on that, but I'm going to let other people chime in first. Do you have a thought on that, Josh?
I do. So the tip that I would give is that your job belongs to your employer, but your career belongs to you. And so it's absolutely possible, but you're going to have to find creative outlets to do that. And so for me, that was writing blog posts. It was creating more content. It was starting to write the book and utilize all the stuff that I had learned. It's going to take more time and discipline to do that because you don't have that exercise at work to continue on. But I ran into the same thing. I mean, about 2 years ago, I limited myself to just what my job required me to do, which was not any cloud. Again, I got to do some other cool stuff with Ansible and all that, with all that good stuff. But where I wanted my career to go wasn't required of me. It wasn't required of me to learn containers. Wasn't required of me to learn Kubernetes. I went and sought that out on my own. And an interesting thing happens though, is when you learn that, you can be an energizer for your team and a change agent moving forward. Now, if you're not patient like a younger me, and I'm still not that patient, so let me deceive you, you can get into trouble by trying to force change in the organization. But use that time outside to better yourself, and then you can bring that in. Sometimes the change will work, but then there's also those times where if you're really not happy and you're not growing, it might be time for a change. But I don't think your growth is strictly dependent on your job. You can absolutely invest the time outside to better yourself. And that's the way that you're going to get the job that you want, is by bettering yourself, and making yourself appealing for that next level.
So some really interesting things you mentioned there. I will say, I don't think that people need to jump jobs to keep themselves fresh. But at some point, you do have to realize either you're outgrowing your job, maybe, or maybe your job isn't giving you the opportunities to look for. But and that's a tough thing to figure out at first. But the thing that Josh mentioned there that's really, really important. I've had this conversation with junior staff at some of the places I worked. I've had fellow coworkers who get upset when they're like, man, I really was hoping that they were going to send me for training on X product, and now I'm kind of bummed out. And I tried to explain to them, I said, look, when you go for your next interview, the employer is not going to be concerned about why your current employer didn't send you for training. They're just going to want to know what you know. Your career is your career. The companies you work at are just steps along the way on your career. And if the company you're working at is not giving you opportunities to learn, you unfortunately have to go out and find those opportunities for yourself. Now, as the leader of a user group, I'd like to recommend that people come and spend time with us. That's an opportunity to hang out with like-minded people. But if you can't do that, or you are doing that and you're not getting fulfilled, that is a sign that maybe the job you're at is not the right job. And I'll give you an example of this. When I started attending this user group, Phil and Kevin, Jeremy, and Jonathan Moss, I met these gentlemen when I started coming, and they were doing interesting presentations, and I started to become friendly with them. And one day I remember saying to Jonathan, I was like, man, I go to these meetings and I see all this cool stuff, and I go to work and I can't use any of it. And I don't understand how you guys are doing this. And Jonathan said to me, he said, that was me at my last job. And now you know what you're going to look for in your next job because you know what you want. And it was a light bulb moment for me because I didn't realize that maybe the job I'm at is not the one that's going to continue me to march forward. So I don't have a simple answer for people on, do you need to jump jobs? Jumping jobs gets you more money per se, but it can also work against you if you don't have the right reasons. But if you're not finding challenges at work, there are opportunities in the community to help you with those things. And we have people from Tech Systems online tonight that can talk about that as well. But there's opportunities for people. The first thing you have to do is you have to look for those opportunities. I think that's the first thing that you have to really do. Phil, have you had experiences with jumping jobs or new challenges or finding challenges?
Well, I think the focus is the direction. I think I go back to what Josh said originally, and that what I was focused on is find the direction. Is what direction do you want to go, and be it your job. No, so I think too. Just because you say job doesn't mean company, doesn't mean career, doesn't mean the environment. And so, hey, you're just in the wrong job. And I know a couple of people who've jumped like 4 or 5 times within their own company because they were progressing as they went along. And so, hey, this isn't the right thing. I've learned a new thing, and I jumped jobs. And yeah, there you go. Here he jumped out. So he rose his hand. Because I don't know how many jobs have you had, Kevin, at where you are.
I'm on my 3rd position in 5 years. Like, and it's not just like promotion, it's like distinct. Like I went from Citrix engineering to .NET shared platform to now shared container platform that I manage.
Yeah. So you've gone all different roads because it was a progressive action to say, hey, you know what, I'm not interested in this, and my direction goes me that way. And then you jump job. Now, if there's a flexibility within the company you are, it's large enough that you can jump, positions. You think you should. But I think, one of the things is focusing on the direction that you're interested in, or you have a passion for. And, to the point you, Kevin, Mike, you said, is the idea that, hey, I wish they would have sent me for training. Well, it's on you to get that training. And there are communities out there, especially if you're in the PowerShell world, there are people who will help you. Now, granted, you need to put in the effort to get there, but they will absolutely help you, and they will absolutely put you in the right places. And if you need help, I'm happy to help you, put you in the right place. And, even, I oftentimes reach out to people, and, when it times comes when I need some more Ansible help, I'll certainly be reading Josh's book and all that kind of stuff. So there are tons of books to, I got a ton of books over here that are content that I'm looking for. Now, I'm not going to be an expert in half this stuff, but it is an avenue for me to say, is this the direction I want to go down? And that's kind of what I talked about before.
Well, I think where people get hung up is when they start to learn a new skill, they target mastery immediately. This is a big mistake that I made a lot, where I'm like, okay, well, what's the best resource for this? It's this 500-page book. 90% of the time, you're not going to read that 90-page book if you buy it, or that 500-page book, 90% of the time. So when you learn something new, change your target from mastery to competence. So what you can do, you can gain competency in about 20 hours, which is way more palatable than 10,000 hours for mastery, because you don't yet know if that skill is worth your mastery. So a lot of things, and especially in my space where they're rapidly moving and changing, I need deep expertise in a few areas and shallow expertise or competency across a broad number of things. And so it's not only until I gain competency do I know whether or not I want to pursue it from a personal interest perspective or a need for my career. And so that's one tip of advice that I would give is when you want to learn something new, change your aim from mastery and finding the best thing in the 100 hours, whatever course that you found, to just competency. And then you'll find that it's way more enjoyable, and then you can move forward from there.
Well, I know that
But I
something
wanted to
that
add
you've worked.
something to that,
Go ahead.
which was, I think, like using community is a really strong way to find what interests you. If you're looking for work to do it, then right away the bar is higher. You're taking on responsibility. You need to be able to be proficient at that. But going into the community, it's a little easier to explore and take on what you feel comfortable with without the pressure of work saying, I have a deadline. And when you find those things that you enjoy, that's what you move into getting stronger at and look to find solutions that work to use as well. So personally, I don't like looking to work as the way to get better. I look to the community and to things that interest me outside as what I want to get better at. And then I funnel that into my work.
I totally agree with that. And something to be said there, like one of the things that was interesting when I started attending our user group, we used to do 1 meeting a month. We switched to 2 meetings a month, but I wanted to learn PowerShell. So I thought, come into a PowerShell user group would be interesting, and maybe I'll meet a few people. First of all, I've met people that helped me found new career choices in my local area. So that was unexpected. I didn't expect that to come from the group. But the thing that really surprised me the most is to the thing that Jeremy just said, which is I got exposed to a lot of ideas that I didn't even know I had interest in until I saw someone use them in a practical way. And then I went, wow, that's kind of cool. And then I went back and I said, let me look into that a little bit more. So yeah, I might find stuff that I'm interested in, but it's sort of like going to a deli and having a big menu. And if you always pick the same two things off, you might miss some super fantastic meal that you never knew you'd love because you never tried it. So one of the things that community does offer is this variety, and to take small bites of a topic and digest it and see if it's for you. And we do some talks and I'm like, oh my God, that is just so not interesting to me, even though the topic was well presented. But then there's other things that I'm like, I got to find a way to incorporate that into my day-to-day work. So that's where community shines for that stuff. And that's a way to get yourself sort of get your appetite wet for areas that you may not even know that interests you, that you could pursue and take you in directions you never thought of.
So I kind of hear what some of you guys are saying, and this idea of trying to focus, and I'm coming back to focus because that's actually a struggle for me. Is I wanted to actually almost ask Josh, is this, I know that I've heard these terms of like deep work and kind of deep focus, and I'm kind of hearing is that, hey, you allocate time in the morning and kind of it's a focus. Is that kind of that part of that process, or what have you found in your time to learn all these things, or even to potentially look at this and just say, throw that away, I don't need that, or I have enough competency in here, I don't need any more?
To touch on deep work, I stumbled across that because I switched from more the reactive firefighting of sysadmin to more engineering work, and I found that I would give so much of myself to my job during the day that I wouldn't have anything left, and I needed a way to condense my learning and my progress into a more, I don't know, just in less time. And so I stumbled across a book, a really weird series of events. We just moved, and my neighbor recommended me this book called The Shallows, and it's about how the internet is affecting our brains and how the technology you use literally changes the neural pathways in your brains and basically changes your attention span the more that you use the internet, because it's more of a shallow activity. If you notice, like, we don't read web pages from top to bottom anymore like you do a book. You kind of scan and you click a link. So it's just like a really fascinating thing that brought awareness to the fact that what I choose to do with my time and how I consume technology can actually change my attention span. And so I dove into a little bit about that. And I wrote a blog post called Detaching from Distraction, which really, I think it was like 2 years ago now, where I explained like my beginning parts of that. But what it looks like now is I do have deep work sessions in the morning. That's one of them. That means like everything else is turned off and I know what I'm going to do ahead of time. So I use a bullet journal, and the night before I go and write down, what it is that I want to do in that time slot. So there's not a question. I don't have to waste any mental cycles figuring out what it is I'm going to do. Also during that time, I use an app called Freedom, and it blocks social media and it blocks email. I don't have the option to go and waste my time on those things because I have something to do. I also turn my phone on airplane mode during that time. And so that way I can get a lot more done in less time because I'm not wasting it context switching or fiddling around because I'm avoiding doing something difficult or, that takes more energy and therefore I want to avoid it. I use the same things at work to the best of my ability, being a sysadmin or SRE, like you always have to have that avenue of contact, and that's PagerDuty for me. But I do a lot of things where I only check my email right around like between 4 and 6 times, where I have like maybe hour increments or 2-hour increments. And in that time, I usually have like an hour to 2 hours of what I try to do deep work, where I close Slack, I close email, I grab my Jira card or whatever I'm working on, and I work on that thing. And then I kind of resurface. And this is a part where I'm getting better at, because I'm getting to the point where I get focused for so long that it takes a lot of mental energy, and I need to step away from the computer to kind of recharge, because I find that I burn myself out mentally because I can focus so much on that. Interesting enough, doing that enough has made me more sensitive to alerts. So like once you remove notifications, you become even more sensitive to the impact that they have. And I've had to start to reduce those. So that's what it looks like in a daily cadence. I don't know if there's any more questions about that, but books. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So to that point is that, so you find, I kind of heard that it's you found it personally beneficial to do this deep work thing, But then I kind of also kind of heard you said you get yourself too focused into a single topic. Because I like this idea because I've actually tried to, hey, you know what? I need today's goal is to do this. I need to build this solution for this. And then at the end of the day, you're like, I got 2% of that work done. And so quite as often, that's what I feel. And so I've heard this term of deep work before, and it was like, oh, maybe that can help me in this process. But then, so I haven't,
Well, there's
skimmed that book.
there's a part there that Josh kind of talked about, but I think needs a little bit more focus on, which is the idea of deep work is saying, look, I need to accomplish something. I want to work on something. But then it's the part that awareness is what I call it, to say like, yeah, I know I'm probably going to get like 19 distractions tomorrow. So let me build an environment for myself that allows me to do what I want to do. So it's not just saying, I want to do this, because Phil, that's the thing you just said. I want to accomplish this, but at the end of the day, it didn't happen because you didn't give, and I'm not blaming you, you didn't build an environment that allows you to do it, right? And maybe some of that is part of the sysadmin role. We are there to respond to issues and good at lots of things. And in certain roles, people get called for lots of stuff that may not involve what you do directly, but you have to seem to have the answer for almost any question that comes your way. This idea of deep work is saying, look, I want to work on this and I want to get something accomplished, but I need to create an environment for myself that allows me to do it. So to Josh's point, in the morning, I'm going to set myself so that I can't get interrupted. I know the topic I want to talk about or think about or work on, and I'm not going to give myself any opportunity to get distracted from the thing that I've decided I'm going to focus on. So it's a two-parter. The awareness part has always been a challenge for me as well, but I notice it more, and I have seen Josh's blog posts and tweets about it recently, and I've been thinking about it myself.
Well, I think,
Is that what you think, Josh?
so I think we've all done that. So we've escaped to the server room for some peace and quiet to get something done. I know I have. And the deep work is a way of building in a routine that allows you to do that. So there's a bunch of micro habits that allow me to do that. Like I've set expectations where with my team that I respond to email at this and this. And so if you want to make that more clear, you can do autoresponders, or you can put use your away statuses. And your first hiccup is going to be to ask yourself, where do you truthfully think you find your value? Like, where is your value? Is it in your responsiveness? Because if it's in your responsiveness, you're going to have a really hard time shutting off your distractions to do deep work, because you're rewarded for your responsiveness. And with that, you want to be available all the time. Now, what you want to do is shift that to your performance. You want to find all your value should be from your performance, not your responsiveness. And what you have to do with that is to be more vocal about what it is that you do. And that's a difficult thing for engineers typically to do, is to show the value of the work that they've done, especially if it's designing a system that's complex and not many people understand. And so that's the caveat, is when you want to do that, you both have to build the routine and the habit, but then you also have to take on the responsibility of showing the value in what you're creating, because you're not going to get that from your responsiveness if you have these an hour window, even if you kind of disappear. Now, what I would recommend in the beginning is to start with a small increment, like a half hour or 40 minutes in the very beginning, where you can, turn your status off and, lock down email. The world's not going to end if you are away for 45 minutes. But always have an avenue to be reached. Like for me, it's PagerDuty. So it's just, I don't know, there's a lot of habits in there that have built up.
Did you find that was hard to start, or you said you started slowly?
I started slowly, but it was difficult because once you start to remove them, it's kind of like apps on your phone. You start to delete them. I've done a lot with that as well, but you realize how much time it has on your attention. And you also, in moments of boredom, you would open Twitter, or you would open Slack, or you open email, and you would check them. When they're not there, you're going to still do the muscle memory action of going there. And if you have a blocker like I do, it'll block you. And then you laugh at yourself, but it is tough in the beginning, for sure.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, I don't know if anyone else has this problem, and I don't know if it relates to what you're talking about, but because I jumped in a little late. But I just wanted to know if anyone else has this problem that I have, that once you start working on something, it's really hard to stop. I will get obsessed with solving a problem, and sometimes like it could relate to writing a script, because I have an end goal to achieve that I want to achieve, and I just get relentless in trying to get there. I don't know if that relates at all, but like it could also be, I guess, something that I'm working on that I want to solve that distracts me from doing something else that I want to do. But not really, because I think it's the solving the problem is what I get rewarded. Like I feel rewarded from like solving something, fixing something.
There's a law of diminishing return though on your time investment, and sometimes the best thing you can do is to walk away and let the idea kind of surface in your mind. That happens a lot with coding, the shower idea, so to speak. The way that I negate that, it happens to me absolutely. The way that I combat that is to time box it. So I have hard shutoffs when work ends and family life is supposed to start, and when I need to kind of disconnect. So time boxing those efforts would be my recommendation with that.
So as you said that the idea of showering, and I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that. So if you want to talk about more of that, and then also the idea of avenues of basically allocating your time, saying, hey, it's 5 o'clock and walk away, especially with this home life thing. It's like, it's 9 o'clock and I'm still working. So
the shower idea. So like when you're just, not doing anything else, it kind of comes to you. That happens to me quite often with scripting problems or coding problems where I am obsessed with it and I just can't figure it out. The logic just isn't coming to me. And then you walk away, and then half an hour, you're doing something else. You're like doing the dishes and it'll pop in your head. So that's what I mean by that. There's a lot of diminishing return with your effort. So there will be a point where you're doing more harm to yourself than good by continuing to try and solve the problem, even though you might be able to brute force through it. And then the shut-off point, it's the idea I got from the book Deep Work called a shutdown ritual. And I have a very hard line at like 4:30 that I need to shut down and help my wife with dinner. So I have some kind of accountability there. But I would definitely encourage people to have whatever that time limit is and stick to that like 90% of the time. So it's 5 o'clock, whatever it is. Just because you don't have that exit sign doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to turn off, because you need that time to recover and do your best work. Because then again, the law of diminishing return applies as well, and you're not going to be the best version of yourself the next day if you stayed up till 8 o'clock working.
Hey Josh, do you have like a hard rule with that where like exactly at 4 o'clock you'd stop? Or because I find sometimes I'm caught up I'm in a thought and like I want to see it through and then I can let it go. And I know what you're talking about with knowing when to say no and when to stop, because I can feel that in myself. Like if I'm stuck in something and I get obsessed with it, because it's really easy for me to get obsessed with something until I solve it, and I do that. And then I kind of feel like I get to a point where I realize that, okay, I've been working on this kind of too long and I need to step away. But my compulsion of wanting to see the end, it's like it doesn't allow me, but it's because I'm allowing it, that to take over. But I can sense it. I know when I've crossed the limit. But there are times also on the flip side that where I have a thought and I just want to see it through before I let it go.
So I can relate to that. I struggle with that at work now. Is this a problem? Do you find these are problems that you can't figure out, or you've got the core and you're trying to make it better?
It's kind of both. Like sometimes it's just like I have this, maybe I've been struggling with something for like, an hour, and then finally I learn something and I see like, a path forward to get progress on what I was struggling with. And then I want to see that through, right? Or it could be just I'm in the very beginning and I'm just learning the steps like to get to like accomplishing something. It just is innate that this like underneath everything feeling to want to accomplish things, and that's what pushes me forward, I guess.
Well, the point I was going to make is that, my manager sometimes reminds me, he says, Mike, I understand that you want to complete this task or you want to get this task to this level, but sometimes for this particular task, good enough is okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. And sometimes I have to remember that for myself, that, I solved the issue and I do want to make better code, and I do, so there's a I guess a trade-off there of diminishing returns depending on the amount of work you put in. But also maybe you just need to say to yourself on the front end, like, I'm going to give myself 2 hours on this. And then at 2 hours, I'm going to reevaluate if I should keep going and take a break or maybe transition to something else. instead of just having sort of this open-ended, I'm going to work on this until it's done, right? So give yourself sort of a plan before you start.
Yeah,
What do you
no,
think about that,
I
Josh?
completely
Or
agree with that. Yeah.
how do you feel with that, Josh? Has that been a struggle for you in the past? There's like, when is enough enough? If that makes sense.
No, I absolutely struggle with that. I don't know, more or less on a daily basis, but it's really holding myself accountable to the times to shut down. Yeah,
But
I mean that's
then
really
to not pick it up tomorrow because, hey, you know what I still need to do is it's not doing it right. Or like I'm actually working on something right now. The script I was talking about earlier is that, hey, you know what I need to be able to add some logging to it and all that kind of like, but that's not the requirement. It's not truly in the requirement. But I'm thinking,
oh okay.
how am
So
I
yeah,
going to look
totally.
for this code 10 months from now going, it needs to look a lot better than it's crude. It like I can barely read it now, let alone try and read it in 6 months.
So what I did this with a book. So that's a good example. Where I had like 2 extra chapters go for the book, some more ideas that I wanted to put in there, and it would probably take me a year to write if I expanded it. So like the framework that I use is an MVP, a minimum viable product, and you can apply that like across the board with your technology projects, your coding projects. And so it's like, what is the minimum viable product of this that would get it out the door and efficient? And you start with that, and then you finish it to that point. Now that answers the questions of like a larger project, but if you're talking about more on a day-to-day basis, you need to stop at a point that you feel comfortable pausing, that you can write down and pick up the next day. And that goes into, like, I use the bullet journal for that. So it's kind of two-pronged approach. One is to figure out and revisit, what am I actually trying to accomplish here, so I don't over-engineer it. That's a very common problem for me and a lot of engineers. But then also identifying those places where you could pause and then picking them back up. Otherwise, like, I could work. Well, I have been working, like 12-hour days with where I wake up, and I've realized that I need to scale back a little bit for some recovery. And it goes back to that awareness.
So with that is it. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, like, the idea of like establishing what is good enough, and that whole concept. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I think it's just a struggle for me, part of that.
I've run into situations recently where I worked on a problem and I kept going and I thought it was important. And then, I happen to have coworkers that have knowledge as well, but you feel like you got to solve the problem on your own. And I realized that maybe at some point I would have been better off if I would have reached out to someone for an alternate set of eyes rather than just trying to figure out that problem on my own, just going it alone.
Realize there's other ways to think about a problem other than being at the computer typing. And so this is another thing that I've been doing to distract. Sometimes I need a distraction from what I'm working, and how I do that is through a learning cue. But there's other ways that you can think about the problem. You can think about it logically through your mind. So identify the different stages in that project that you can alternate between. And so like that's the different. I'm one of those people that has to be on all the time doing something productive. And how I've been able to do that in my other time when I'm not away from the computer is to have ideas that I can think about that are they're bigger ideas that require just thought and not any keyboard time, but I can also be interrupted during those things. So identify maybe those different stages that might help, where you've coded the first component and now you're thinking through the pseudocode of the second, and you can take that with you and kind of just mull that over, at dinner or whatever it is, as long as it doesn't completely take you away mentally.
So I want to be a little cognizant of time here, Phil, for a second. We're already an hour in, and I know we could go another 2 hours. I want to keep going, but I also want to just take a break here and see if community members have questions that they haven't had an opportunity to get in. Is there anybody on with us that has a question they'd like to ask, or something that they've heard about, they want to get more information about?
I have a question about something we talked about at the beginning, as far as blogging or sharing things that you've done. I usually don't have a problem documenting the things I've done and sharing them with teammates, but I don't know how to get over the hurdle of, oh, people outside my company would like to see this too, or how do I generalize it so I take out the specifics that apply to my environment and make it useful to other people.
So the gentleman speaking, his name is Jim. Jim, thanks for the question. I don't know that there's one answer for that. You know, one thing that I do when I write is I just feel that I'm trying to relay a story to someone. So when you tell a story, you sort of have to have a reason for why you're telling it. That's a lead in or an intro. Present the problem, what I did to try to tackle the problem and the result that I had and sort of the benefit that came out of it. That's just a very simple plan that you can use to just summarize the work you did into like a cohesive little story that anybody can sort of pick up and read. There is no right or wrong answer on that. Honestly, I would just get in the habit of putting something down in a spot where it can be found and not worrying about, is it good enough for another person to enjoy or take value from? Don't, because what you're going to do there is you're going to stop yourself from doing it because you're wondering if it's good enough. And I think we talked about that earlier. The hurdle is getting over the good enough and just doing. And then you can always come back and edit yourself. I'm sure, Josh, you probably have thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, it always starts with doing. I mean, I don't have much too else to add to that. But the only way you're going to get comfortable is if you start.
So Jim, is your fear that you don't know how to make this, whatever you're talking about, relatable to an outside audience, or that the people that you did the work for don't want you sharing the information outside of corporate boundaries?
A little more of the latter, and or the things I'm talking about might be really specific to my environment.
So that is definitely understandable.
I think it's actually very valuable is if you could generalize some of those things, because in so much of the things that I've found is the edge cases, at least things that I thought valuable. I'm like, holy mackerel, I gotta bookmark that and I gotta find that or read that again, is where people have shared the edge cases. And so often is, even in this community, is I sit and after hours or before hours talk to other people, and what I think is the edge case, or it's just, it only applies to me. They're like, man, I do that too. Or wait, your edge case applies to my other edge case. And so that is the thing. And so, actually, we've actually had a couple talks in this group that are of edge cases that, have come up and like, hey, I have a problem to solve. And basically it's, I need to envision this problem, but I need to do it at scale. And, this, a lot of times scale is everybody's scale. It's just, what I'm saying is at scale is typically a general problem. So I think, even some of the challenges that Josh faces, at, the Stack Overflow scale, that kind of scale can ultimately apply. We can take some of those lessons down to, some of the stuff that Mike's dealing with,
So
even to the stuff that I deal with
for a second. I'm just going to jump in and say, a good sort of yardstick to use for yourself is, most of us find information by going to Google. So if you do a Google search and you had to look to more than 3 or 4 pages to find the answer, that's information that could be useful to someone if it was out there, right? So you don't have to go crazy. If you're finding that you're looking for information and you can't find it quickly, well, then maybe that's something that you might want to think about sharing. So that's one way to look at it.
And the other thing to consider there is you never know what's going to be valuable to some, or even what's going to be popular. Sometimes I've written an article or done a video thinking this is going to be great, everybody's going to love it, and nobody watches it. And then I do another one and discover that 3,000 people watched it, thinking that nobody was going to watch it. So you never know what's going to be valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those edge cases are really valuable to other people. And what I mean is, like, I call it the edge case. It's something that, it's only going to apply to me, but really you're solving the same problem that other people are solving. But hey, I'm talking about files and they're talking about database records. I'm talking about databases and they're talking about actually just 80 users. And so it's all the same to them, but the end nouns are all different, but the actual function and the workflow is all the same.
So did that help, Jim?
Sure. Actually, there's probably not been many times where I thought, this is what I could share, It's more that just jumping off from where the discussion started. I write stuff at work now. Make the leap to sharing it outside.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would add real quick to that. I mean, share it to share it. If someone finds value in it, great. If nobody finds value in it, like no harm done, right?
So, Josh, what would have been some of your, your tools for sharing and kind of thing? Or, I know you kind of talked about even some of the terms. You talked about the book. You talked about like bullet list. You talked about Freedom. Is that the app you talked about? Some of the other tools that you use in your, or things you've learned over the past and things you've, used today.
So for all my technical writing, it's done in Markdown. So if you wanted to contribute to any basically Git repository, it's going to be Markdown. My blog, I just moved it to Hugo from Jackal. So that's all Markdown as well, static site generator. So yeah, a lot of Oh, go ahead. Sorry, question.
I was going to say that the top of the site looks really good.
Thank you. So yeah, Markdown. What other tools do I use on a daily basis? VS Code, if I'm not in the terminal. It's all stored in source control. But that's all the tools that I do for writing. I mean, for the book, I used ASCII docs and then converted it to a PDF, but that's just another markup language or syntax. So,
but in your even your daily work, are there any kind of, in work itself?
From a technology standpoint, it's a lot of Azure PowerShell and Terraform from a technology stack perspective. And then also, of course, like Git for source control, and then I think there's Azure DevOps for the CI/CD pipeline moving to GitHub Actions. But yeah.
You have any favorite resources for learning or preferences on how you try to pick up new topics other than the deep work sort of concept? Video, books, that kind of deal?
Oh, yeah, all dependent on what you want to learn. But the thing that I learned was this is kind of the phrase that I go with now. So I used to get stuck learning, and then I would never do anything with the learning, and then it would fall off and it would fall out of my head. So the phrase that I remember is learn enough to practice until you understand. And so when you're learning something, use the key to make it stick is deliberate practice, and that deliberate practice is application. So find some way to do it. Now, the example that I used in the blog post I wrote, Be an Engineer, You're an Engineer, Be an Engineer, is around Kubernetes, where I read the book, and then I had to find some way to apply it before the knowledge stuck. And so what I used was TeamCity as a way to deploy it inside of Kubernetes. Now, I wasn't ever going to use it on my day job. We weren't going to move our infrastructure into containers on Kubernetes, but it gave me a reason to practice it, and it gave me a framework. So try a couple of your learning with something that's practical that you can find. And then, after a while, the utility of what you're learning will kind of find you.
So that was a good phrase. Could you repeat that one again? Learn enough to practice.
Practice until you understand.
Until you understand. I'm writing that one down. I like that.
I'm tweeting it right now, so you can retweet it.
Cool. Done.
So Josh, we've been pinging you with questions and talking about some topics. I want to wrap up here soon. So first I want to say thank you for your time. But is there anything that you would really wanted to talk about that we didn't get to? Is there an area that you want to sort of highlight that's something maybe we didn't get a chance to cover tonight?
I think it's so one of the topics I don't know if we dive deep enough into was getting over the fear of learning new things. Now this really stung me about like a year ago. And two things that I'll say about that is I've had to learn to be okay with being unproductive. So I would stop myself from learning new things because learning new things is hard and it takes time. And so a good example was Ansible. When my team first adopted Ansible, I struggled. I really defaulted back to PowerShell. It was easier. I knew it better. And I had to become uncomfortable with being unproductive again and it taking me more time to write Ansible than PowerShell so I can improve that proficiency. So that's the first thing. And then I mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again, is when you're learning new things, shift your focus from the outcome of whatever it is you're learning. So if you're trying to learn a new thing like Terraform, don't focus on the outcome of like, all the things you're going to do after you learn Terraform. Focus on the process of learning instead and learn to love the process. That is going to skyrocket your learning. It's going to make it more enjoyable. Because if you're honest with yourself, if you stick with the outcome base, it's a very unrewarding way to go through life. Is like, I will be happy when I get to this flagpole. When you get there, it just moves 3 seconds later. Good example is the book. I wrote like the last line of the technical chapter, and I had like 2 seconds of gratification. And I was like, oh, I've got a month now to figure out how I'm going to promote this. And so it's on to the next thing. So really learn to enjoy the process versus the outcome, and learning will be a lot more enjoyable for you.
So that's really interesting. You touched on a topic, the process, a little bit about the journey, that reminded me of what we were talking about earlier. I wanted to mention the idea. I know this happens to me a lot. Is we kind of work and we kind of go along a timeline and we do things, and we always are looking forward. Like, I need to get better. I need to get better. I need to get better. I talk about this to my kids all the time. I'm like, it's important to look back and understand where you've come from. In other words, appreciate what you've accomplished already, because sometimes you get so focused on being the best or trying to get to a particular goal, you don't realize how far you've gotten along that path already. And I find for myself that sometimes when I look back and I go like, a year ago, I could not have written this code at all. It's gratifying because it's a reminder that I have been learning and I have been accomplishing things. And I find that as a whole, technical people are pretty bad at rewarding ourselves for accomplishing things. We just keep finding ways to keep finding new things that we have to learn, and not stopping and appreciating the things we have already absorbed and gotten good at. So your comment about the process and enjoying it along the way is very relevant.
Well, how I got to that was the problem was I would always compare myself to other people. I would compare myself to the MVPs and I'd be like, well, I don't know this, I don't know that. And when you do that, you never feel quite adequate, but you don't know the full story of what they're going through. And maybe you know a lot that they don't, but it doesn't appear that way when you're comparing. So what I've shifted my mind to is I still use the comparison with other people to improve my aim, but they're more the compass than anything else. The only true progress that matters is, am I better than what I was yesterday? So shift the comparison to who you were yesterday, but use other people as the aim to help you figure out where you want to go. Again, back to that direction that you want to find. Other people can help you navigate the direction, but they're not meant to be the comparison of your progress. Your past self is. So if you're incrementing, then that is good. And so with that reflection, day to day, 1% better is really the only goal and true measurement that you can have for your progress.
How about you, Phil? Have you had any success in recognizing how far you've come in your achievements along the way, or is that something that escapes you?
Well, I think I'm a big advocate of trying to give back to the community. And one of the satisfaction points, or at least self that I've found, is getting someone to give back. We're not like I'm a big thing of I won't teach you to fish, not to not give you the fish. That whole concept. And I think I'm saying it wrong, but that idea is that like I try really hard to explain why it is. Somebody asked me, hey, can you help me with this? Like, I want to explain how to get it. And I'm not going to give you the answer. And so what really gives me, makes me proud is the fact that somebody can come back and say, hey, I solved this problem with my own. Or like, hey, I just spent 2 hours digging through this problem and I was glad that I didn't have to ask you, but I got through it. And so that is, real value to me. And, I think that is, this whole idea, I really like the idea of the practice thing, but the idea that, hey, you can really work towards understanding. And that's really something that I at least find myself struggling with, is turning off the understanding, or the struggle for understanding. And, personally, that's my struggle, is to look too deep into a problem. And I think we kind of talked about it before, is the idea that when is enough, or call it scope creep. That's the term that I use, is scope creep is really bad for me personally. And, even, I don't know, get your opinion, at least the community's opinion or Josh's how much is enough? And you said, hey, minimum viable product. But I think, even some of the other projects I've done, well, hey, what does this look like from a security perspective? What does this look like from a mass deployment? What does this look like from a documentation like that wasn't the problem. The problem was get this done, not, hey, well, how can I read this in 6 months? Or, what's the implications and how do I rewrite this so I can deploy this again in a month to 5,000 computers instead of just this 5 computers I'm dealing with. And they're like, just give me it on 5 computers. I don't need 10. I don't need 100.
A good way to combat that is it's still to use the MVP framework, where you want to go back and revisit, like, what is it exactly that we're trying to solve, and what's the smallest unit of work that's going to get that done. But leave room for those improvements that you have, because they're all good ideas. But just document them as stages and iterations of the project, instead of go plating it up front or trying to do all, like, front loading all the engineering is what I call that, is where you want to do the best implementation off the bat. But more than likely, that's not going to get through because it's so much work, and you're going to maybe you don't have the leadership capital to push that huge project through, but you do the small thing. But for your brain, for me, what I need is a place for those ideas to go. And that is where I usually document them down of, like, this is the smallest thing that will get you what you want or what I want to do. And here are the next couple steps that I want to address. And then you can order them and prioritize them as you see fit.
Like doing what you see, like to-dos all over your code. To do this, to do that.
Essentially, or in a document, right? Like a spec and schedule type thing.
Cool.
So Josh, could you demystify what an SRE is a little bit? And what I mean by that is, and I saw the eye roll there. I don't want to make it go crazy. What I mean is, what's the jump from S to SRE from Sysadmin, or what are those organizations that have those kind of roles doing that are the sort of the old school companies are struggling at? Because I think there's a number of people in the audience that may not understand how to get from point A to point B, and also what are the skills that they need to work on if they want to sort of be in that direction. So you've had a trajectory, right? Help desk, sysadmin, SRE, deep learning. As you get to these more defined companies, what do you find is working, it's not working? What are they expecting of the people that come into these positions?
The biggest difference is I'm like right next to developers. So in a traditional organization where I would work prior, I would be like, there's the sysadmin team, and you do these set of things, and the developers over here, and they have completely different sets of tools. Now everybody here is PowerShell User Group. We basically got the way to open the portal into the DevOps land, because you understand automation and code. What's the next step? This is what I've linearly done throughout my career, is I've moved closer and closer to development through PowerShell. So the next step for me was to learn about source control, learning how to commit code, then learning about release engineering. Once I learned those, and I was developing my own PowerShell modules and shipping them around, really the portal for me was infrastructure as code. And so it started with PowerShell, where I would write PowerShell scripts to configure a server. That's step one. You can iterate on that by going to DSE. You can iterate on that further by using Terraform or Ansible. But then once you start to use those tools and you define all of your infrastructure as code, the role between sysadmin and developer starts to diminish, because you use the same tools to manage that code. You'll use source control to move it around and to check out branches and to collaborate. You'll use release engineering to build the bundles or the products, and then automated testing will be in that pipeline, and you'll deploy it out. And so that was the progression for me. Was I started in automation. I started to pick up these tools because they made sense to add into my tool belt from a PowerShell perspective, and then infrastructure as code really bridged that gap. On a day-to-day basis, the big difference is I work hand in hand with the developers. I learn more about the code than I would on the back-end systems. And then from a mindset perspective, this is something that I'm still trying to work through and articulate, but there's this emphasis on toil reduction. So now that you have all those tools in your toolbox, if you have automation, you have source control, you have a way to distribute it, you can really do anything, right? Like you can automate anything. And so what they aim to do is to reduce their toil level. And the toil is all that busy work that has you bogged down and keeps you from doing the projects you want. And so there's this like ruthless mindset on eliminating that as much as possible and using the tools to solve those problems and design it yourself, because you're not going to find an SCCM product or a patching product for every one of those little toil needs that you have. Maybe it's just you want to create a Git repository of permissions for TeamCity or something like that. So those are kind of the two, like the trajectory that I've gone through and the technology that I've learned, and then, you know, the mindset. There's a saying in there that, you know, like DevOps isn't all about tools, but in my opinion, I agree it's not all about tools, but it's a place to start. And it's going to, learning all those tools and learning how to code is going to create a shared language between the two teams, dev and ops, that you can use to get into that space and further your career.
So Robert was asking, what do you define as toil? And I think I would say it's things that cause you to
pain,
spend time, not just pain, but expend cycles, right? So we had on Kevin Marquette 2 years ago, and he was doing a demo on, I think, arrays. And at some point in the talk, he was talking about how he works at that time at Loan Depot. This is before he went over to AWS. And he said something that sort of stuck with me all along. He said that all the tasks that come in, they invest the time to figure out how to try to automate that task, because they assume that that task will come to their queue at some point again. So there's value in trying to figure out how to move that task along as fast as possible. So they invest time on the front end, not just solving the problem, but how to do it in a way that they can do it through code or through automation, so that the next time it comes through, it's a known entity.
Well, you touched, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's sort of a way of thinking that I never really thought about until someone said it like that.
You touched on the exact way that you start to show your value from your performance versus your responsiveness, and it's to reduce the toil, and that is a very noticeable burden lifted from the team or process. So a good example that I had that I've used a few times is this testing that we had to do every week, and I'll shorten the story for the sake of time, but basically we had to dedicate 2 hours per week when we were on call for this particular task. What we did was we had a PowerShell script that we converted to an Ansible playbook, and we used Tower to delegate that to them. And so after a couple of weeks of being on the call and watching them and having them run it, walk them through it, we disappeared from the meeting, and then they were able to finish that task. And they would only bring us in when our process broke, and it was truly our fault. But then that's 2 hours that we got back every week as a team. There's so many things like that, like disk space cleanup that you could do on a schedule. And so it's really finding all those opportunities. But that's precisely the stuff that you can start with, whether you're learning an automation language like PowerShell, or you're moving into more of a configuration management tool like Ansible. They both are really great at targeting that type of work, where you can start to reduce the toil level enough that you can get some time back to do even more engineering and architecture work that you really want to do.
That's really interesting. I would also say that another way to consider is that I think all of us have work we want to do, and then there's work we have to do. And if we can eliminate the work that we have to do, that gives us more time for the work we want to do. I think as humans, we're better at solving problems than repeating iterative processes. So if we can get those processes automated so that we can work on the things that are not very ripe for automation or have unique challenges, that's where we're best spent our time. So that's just another way to look at it. Phil, have anything you want to add before we wrap here?
No, I'm just enjoying my my jaunt over here on Twitter, and I'm actually gonna call out Josh King, because he said it's the idea of his daughter is now learning, no longer learning to read, but learning how to learn to read, and that's really, you know, a valuable skill. And I think that's really something that we in the community even need to learn, is that, like, how to, you know, become better at this is not so much even how do I become better. No, how do you learn to get better at that? You know, it's kind of like what is it?
The meta?
The meta. Yeah, it's like the meta. I was thinking more of the Leonardo DiCaprio movie where it's going inside the other,
Inception?
The inception of the whole world. So.
Well, I think we could talk about this probably another 2 hours, and honestly, I would love to do that.
Awesome
but
topic.
Maybe what we need to do is break these into smaller bits and do them more often.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
So let's just wrap here real quick and throw it out to the people who have stuck with us. Is there any last minute questions anybody wants to get in, or topics they'd be curious about? because otherwise we're going to wrap this up in the next few minutes here and say thank you to Josh for his time this evening.
Yeah, and then are there any other things that you think that any kind of funny any words of wisdom there, Josh?
Not on the spot.
Wow. We'll also maybe we could have you come back in the future and you could demo some of that cool Ansible stuff when you have a chance.
Love to.
Yeah, you can just do an Ansible and Terraform stuff. That'd be fun.
All right, so people are quiet. So why don't we break here? I'm gonna thank everybody for coming tonight. Thanks, Josh, for spending time with us. I really enjoyed this tonight, and there was a really huge amount of chatter in the chat. So I think this was valuable for a lot of people. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you soon.